Hi, my name is Jaime Stief. I work with the Tamarack Institute. You're joining a webinar called A World Without Labels, Taking a Service-Centered Approach to Inclusion with Templeton Sawyer, Justin Eweka, Jennifer Delhorbe, and my colleague, Heather Keam. So we'd like to start this call with just a moment of gratitude and acknowledgement. I'm joining from the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Waterloo, Ontario. We encourage everybody to share where they're joining from in the chat. And we're doing this as part of our commitment to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation process. But while acknowledging that doing a land acknowledgement is an act of truth, but it takes much more than that to do reconciliation, to engage in reconciliation. And we hope that we can find ties to our actions in relation to reconciliation on today's call. And with that, I am going to hand the microphone to my colleague, Heather Keam.
Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling in from. I just wanted to say that I am calling in from Brantford, which is located on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Haudestonees, the Six Nations, and Anishinaabe and neutral people. I'm really excited to be here today with you all on this great topic. And I think it's a topic that's going to stretch our minds. I'm the Associate Director of the Deepening Community Practice Area here at Tamarack. And, you know, for those of us who are working in community and service providers and organizations and even associations, we really do describe the people that we work with by labels, such as low income or priority neighborhoods. And that is to help us to know where we're targeting our efforts. However, it is a labeling of people that reduces them to the element of their experience, and usually often a negative one, or what I call deficit. And I love this quote, and I heard this a long time ago from asset-based community development advocate John McKnight. And he said, when you label someone, you make them invisible. And I kind of looked at him going, what do you mean by that? And it took me a little bit of time in processing to say, oh, I know what you mean. Because if you're in that neighborhood and you are a neighbor or somebody living in there and you're named priority neighborhood, when people say, oh, where do you live? Oh, I live in such and such neighborhood. Oh, that priority neighborhood. And so it really gives that deficit, that negative connotation. And so today we are joined by three amazing, very passionate people who will be talking about the idea of a world with no labels. And what should we be thinking about, and how could we think about changing this process and this way of thinking? I do want you to remember that when you've seen one community, you've only seen one community. And so we're going to give you experiences from three communities. They are not your community, and that we ask that you sit back, grab a pen and paper, a cup of tea, and really do the hard part, which is translating what you're hearing into your own community, because they're not going to give you the answer to how to do this in your community. So on that note, I'd like to introduce my three very passionate people. So Templeton Sawyer is an employment support practitioner and the host of Tweet the Leader in You podcast. Wow, that was hard to say. And co-facilitator of the CEI and Teamworks Youth Focused Community of Practice in Halifax, Nova Scotia. However, there's been some transition and he is now in Toronto, but I still think there'll be some ties. He brings a great deal of lived experience to the table and is a passionate youth advocate who seeks to help youth in both Nova Scotia and the Bahamas believe in themselves and increase their confidence through leadership and skill development programs. When Templeton thinks about the word inclusion, he has a passion to place action into including everyone. Next, I'd like to introduce Justin Eweka. Got it. An African Nova Scotian with lived experience with people who identify as having a disability and is born and raised in Halifax. Justin is a strong advocate for people who identify as having a disability. He has been involved in the community both professionally and recreationally for 20 years through various nonprofit organizations, supporting various stakeholders and community engagement efforts. Currently, Justin is an employment facilitator with Easter Seals, Nova Scotia, working with youth and adults, helping those to further educate and gain meaningful employment within the community. Next, I'd like to introduce Jen Delhorbe, who is a supervisor of community supports with KW Habilitation in Waterloo Region. Jen has over 30 years experience and has worked within the developmental sector, assisting individuals with intellectual disability to live the life they choose within their community. Jen has a strong passion for KW Habilitation's vision, a community where everyone belongs and participates. Jen has brought a community-first mindset to the work that she does and feels very passionate about the rights for everyone to find belonging and support at the community level. So, over to the three of you.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Heather, for that introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Like Heather mentioned, my name is Templeton Sawyer, and yes, I have moved to a different area of Ontario and Toronto. And it's such a pleasure to be in this space today to connect with you and to share a really important topic. So today, as we moved into our discussion, we're going to be talking about the importance of stop it labeling people, speaking about the history of labeling, defining labeling, and what happens when people label. We're going to talk about meeting in the middle, community and people with disabilities coming together, and people in general. There's a quote that says, "People are not client service, but citizens at the center of their community." And that's something that I value and something that's really important. And so as we continue to connect, we're going to hear some inspiring stories and stories that will share both negative and positive sides of this area and showing how we can connect. And so community that is doing the work and individuals. So we hope that you get connected with us as we continue to move forward. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen, and I'm really excited to be here today. I'm looking forward to seeing what you put into the chat box as we have this discussion, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So I've been tasked to start us off with the once upon a time. So where does labels come from? And where does labeling come from? And literally, we have labeled people since the beginning of time. We have always needed a name or a short phrase to put people in a place so that we knew where they belonged and how to support them because of where they were. And unfortunately, because we use that one word or that one short phrase, we've highlighted only one capacity, one part of a person, right? We haven't celebrated the other 99% of it. So as I mentioned, we've relied on these labels to tell us where people fit. These labels can be positive or negative. A label is, great friend, fabulous coworker. Those are fantastic. But on the opposite end, not great coworker is also a label that can be applied to people. Historically, labels have been used to assert power and control over others. So having that mindset of you're just a person with a whatever, or they're only. So that's how we've asserted our power and our control over labeled society and labeled people within societies. And honestly, oftentimes people need a label to receive service. I work in the developmental sector. I work for an agency that is very much forward thinking, but because we receive our funding through the Developmental Services Ontario, any person who comes to seek support from my programs must have a label, and that label is developmental disability, right? And if you've ever worked with somebody with a developmental disability, there's a lot that goes into that. And that's not just who they are. But unfortunately, they need that medical label in order to get the supports that are ministry funded. So what we've done, unfortunately, throughout all of this is we've now trained society. And how we train society, that we've trained them so that they know where these people belong, right? This group of labeled people belong over there, or this group of labeled people belong over there. And now we have to actually change how that is, how we're looking at that, because yes, you can have a space over here, but you should also have a space throughout your community where you are valued and where you feel that you can give back. So here's a challenge. Doesn't everybody belong in the community? Like, honestly, does not every single person that you know belong and deserve to have an active role within their own community? Not a special place for special people, but a special place for all people. So I'm going to challenge you, no matter what the label is, find a place for somebody beside you, walk with them, do things with them, include them in your life, in your community's life, because there's a lot that they can give back. So now let's just do a really brief definition. So I did a Webster's dictionary search, yay, and excuse me, in the simplest terms, it's describing someone or something in a word or short phrase. You cannot get to the essence of a person with one word or one short phrase. There are so many other things in a person besides that one label of being a problem child, or what that one neighborhood, that at-risk neighborhood. There's so much more embedded in that. So let's move beyond that, right? Let's look at all of those other things, because when we do tend to label people in this way, the impact is we're now deficit-based, we're not asset-based. We're not inclusionary. Instead, we're isolating, because there's special places for special people and you have to have a label to join. So it's polarizing. People will have very opposite feelings about a group with a certain label. There's refusal of supports or services because they don't have the right label, right? So think about it. When you put a name on something or someone, what does that impact going forward? How is that going to impact you? How is that going to impact the person who has been labeled? And then also too, think about how that's going to impact society, because we can't expect a change in our community unless we make those changes first. So by taking those labels and removing them and instead looking at the positives that somebody can give, that is a way to move beyond. So that's about it for me. So onwards and upwards. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. You know, and Jennifer, thinking about the powers of when we're shifting the labels, and we think about some of the labels that are there, that people are calling out: transgender, disabled, extrovert, introvert, heterosexual, gay, guy. There's so many labels that people are deemed of someone who's not capable, and label you attach a lot of people into a certain category because they're not your certain type of people, or they're not your certain type of individual to move forward as the way you want to go. In your own bias and putting your own biasness into it, what are some other labels that you are aware of? If you can list some of them in the chat. What are some of the labels that you're not aware of that will help? I know that being in employment as an employment support practitioner and looking at in employment, we always try to put, especially doing hiring practices, we put people into certain categories, like, oh, this person may not be capable because they're so quiet, or they may not be capable because they didn't get this certain experience, or they're not having a number of experiences, or they're not fit, or they're not the color of their skin. You think about other things culturally, or they not of the same language as you. We're putting people in so much areas of label, and the mindset that we need to shift that's affecting people, especially in the job market, to even get a job, or even want to be inspired to work in an industry which is growing, and in certain industries sometimes push that away from people who are just so passionate to connect, and stuff like that. And of course, in the science, that you may also cause people negative self-concept. They may not be aware of their self-worth, their self-identity of where they want to go. And so being very careful of that. And I know I spoke to someone the other day and say, oh, did you know extrovert and introvert is labeling? And they said like, oh, I did not know. I was like, yeah, you're putting a person who is extroverted and say, oh, they're extrovert, they can do it, they can do the job. Let's just put them into that area. But you don't know if they want to actually talk that much. So you cannot do that to them as well. Yeah. Activists, yes. Immigrant, low income, yeah. Those are some areas. Youth, senior, yeah. Especially with the youth and senior, we're always putting youth and senior into categories as to where they can go and how they can be involved in certain categories, and how can we just be more inclusive with the language of welcoming everyone into the space of with their ideas. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, ADDIC, have and have not provinces. Yeah, these are some good ones. I'll turn it over. Yeah.
Okay, so I will be speaking to you now about how everyone has gifts and assets. So as I described earlier, we've been trained to look at deficiencies. In order to receive services, you have to have a label. There has to be something wrong, right? Or there has to be something that you need help with. But what happens if a person doesn't actually fit into that exact category? Really, what will happen to them? And who will provide the support? And that's why labeling can be so challenging, because if you've got the label, one group takes ownership and others don't. So let's unpack that a little bit. I want to change our thoughts to everybody has gifts and assets. Yes, we all have quirks. Every single one of us has quirks. I have multiple quirks and I celebrate those. And I'm lucky enough to be able to celebrate my quirks. And I have friends and family who will celebrate them along with me. And they're not seen as deficiencies, right? So let's look at other people's quirks and look at what the benefits are of, because every single person has an asset, has assets. Don't look at the problems, look beyond those and celebrate what our differences are, because that's where our gifts come from. And sometimes we have to remember that people need permission to share those gifts. So as I was preparing for this webinar, I reread this book. I'm just going to do a show and tell, The Abundant Community by John McKnight and Peter Block. And what resonated a lot with me in this is a little description that they did about pioneer life, back way in the beginning. So I am going to take a little bit of time to read just a few paragraphs of that, because I think this really highlights that everyone has a gift and an asset, even if they have been labeled. So if you'll bear with me. So this is a group of pioneers that are crossing the US and are about to develop their homestead. So this new community was a creation of families. You had Mary, Sam, and their children with Charles, and then you had Abby and their children and Charles's father, Robert. This new community was a personal creation of these people, their gifts, their skills, their capabilities, and their strong relationships that grew as they worked together. Now, every neighborhood today has the assets of those first settlers, the gifts, the skills, the capacities of each of the residents, and the power to establish working relationships that also allow us to find our way. So like the pioneers, we start community building in our neighborhoods by using our gifts, our skills, and our own capabilities. Now, the pioneers' progress can help guide us. Like us, their families were imperfect, limited people. Mary was a bitter person. Sam was given to too much drink. Their oldest boy, John, had a shriveled leg from birth, and the younger boy, Peter, well, they called him slow. He would never learn how to read or count money. Now, Charles had lost his right arm in a mill accident back from where they came from, and Abby was tired all the time. Their teenage daughter, Jane, often drifted away in her mind and forgot what she was doing. And Charles's father, Robert, had a hard time walking. These are the people who created a homestead and a hometown. They each had clear problems, limitations, and dilemmas, but they had a clear priority. They must create a community. And so it was that they set aside their deficiencies, their labels, and instead focused on their capacities. So Sam knew carpentry, so there's your houses being built. Mary had known weaving from childhood, so there's your sewing, your clothing, and all of your personal items. John was a tireless worker in spite of his heavy lift, and we know we always need those strong people with that strong back to help us build what we want to do. And little Peter, he loved tools and pretty much could fix anything. And Charles could do any kind of iron work and was a crack shot. Abby knew the Bible from heart and could preserve any kind of food. Jane sang beautifully and loved to make a garden. And old Robert had a mind full of know-how about nearly everything. So do you notice how Mary's bitterness turned into a celebration of the fact that Mary can cook anything? And did we notice how, that Peter, who was called slow, was then celebrated instead because he was a tireless worker who would give everything? Let's leave the deficiencies, let's leave the labels behind, and instead look to what a person can offer. Ask them what they can offer, because again, if somebody's never asked, they will never give. I'll pass it along to equal opportunity.
I am Justin. So within the field that I've been in, amongst the many ages, all the way from as young as 4 and 5, all the way up to like 80, 90 actually is oldest, the opportunities afforded to them can be very different depending on what they're labeled as. As we said before, those labels can have a great effect. But a lot of times it's understanding that those building blocks can be the same. We all are the same, but it can all make different things. But if I was to tell you guys, make a word for me out of these letters, L-A-Q-U-E, you all might come up with the word equal, but there's also AL and Q and many other words that you create within that. So it's realizing that we all may have the same building blocks and starting points, but there's many ways to reach them. So if it was in your community to part of a sports team or access employment funds or just be in the job world, sometimes doing those things may look very different, but labels that are put on you will change the outcome of you even having a chance to do it, or doing it may look a little bit different. Changing those will provide more visibility and breaking down barriers, showcasing others in and outside of your own community what it means to be labeled a disability. Many of the people I know that have gone on to do amazing things, which I'm going to allude to in a little bit of a story. A lot of times people saw Down syndrome, that they are only meant to just stay in this box, and having them be here, sit with us is enough. And I don't know, I know for myself, just being in a room with somebody isn't enough to make me feel included. I feel you guys are all the same, just being here. So having that put on you would not work. So them being in the, I don't know, they went to a world competition, which has been very, very great. But having that opportunity to be involved, not only just with people in their own community, but people outside of that has changed quite a few things around them. So being able to get out there in the world and have a chance, not letting those barriers that people are putting on you, because majority of the time when you are putting a label on somebody, it tends to put the negative connotations and ideas that you have on that person, and you're stopping them, which in turn, they will internalize and do that about themselves. And that will just stop any kind of growth for them, for you, and us as a whole. With that, I'll pass it along to the next part.
Thanks, Justin. And I would say community and individuals meeting in the middle is so important. It's really important. And I actually use the quote again: people are not client service, but citizens at the center of their community. We have to see people as valuable humans, as they grow in anywhere, in anything that they want to be in society, has to see them as where they want to go, and just giving them a chance without looking at them as what they can bring to them, instead of what they can bring to include everything of their beautiful assets and gifts that they have to bring. And going and looking at the article that was shared by Jaime, I read some of them. Everyone has a gift. Seeing that, allowing them to grow, knowing that there's a bit of relationship building that there's required in order to grow that with people, and giving them a chance. Everyone deserves a chance. You deserve a chance on this call as well. And so thinking about that is really, really important. Listening is key. I remember we were in Antigonish, I think it was last year, Heather and I, we were at a gathering, and we did like this listening tool where we had to actually look at the next person, allow them to talk, share, and all we had to do was shake our heads, smile, support them, connect with them, allow them to feel the words that we believe in what they are saying. And so if we could just like literally just, I know I'm a passionate individual. So every time I listen, I have to input or say my little piece. But no, giving that other individual the chance to express and to talk is really good, to meet them in the middle as to where they are. They know that you have something to say, but giving them the opportunity to share. We say we are listening, but are we listening? Are we really listening to the words? And I know that a lot of people, sometimes we may be so caught up and we may be so busy when we're engaging with other people and we're trying to meet them in the middle. But are we really listening when we're really having those engaging conversations and trying to connect with someone who's very passionate, that passionate youth who wants to share what they want to do? And then are you trying to downgrade or bring them down or put them in a different, are you listening to that senior who has a brilliant idea of innovation, but you're thinking of, oh, their age is a barrier to where they can go? Are you listening to the passion that they have? Think about that.
So I'm going to give you guys just 3 stories of the way labels have affected, and I'm speaking directly from what they have said. So I hope this hits with you guys. So first I'm going to talk about Matt, who his experience in getting employment and how labels have affected him, and throughout minor parts of his life too. So labels as a whole have been both negative and positive to him, helping him move through this world. In gaining employment, even though he has been successful and he holds a position at a local toy store, to get to that process of being able to even be accepted in there has been very difficult. In one of his very first jobs, set up through an organization, which thankfully, to the fact that he is labeled as somebody with a disability, he was able to access resources. Whereas, many people, as Jennifer talked about earlier, until you get that certain label, they don't have access to it. Or if they have a different label, they may not be able to get anything at all. So moving through that, he was able to gain employment. And in that environment, right away, the managers, the coworkers all came together to support him. The first thing they did was talk to him and get to know him. They knew he had a disability, but they didn't frame that is who he was. They didn't come in and choose to be like, hey, we're just going to have you here. You're going to stand off to the side, and that will be your involvement with us. For him, they had him cooking, he was cleaning, merchandising, he was doing everything involved. There happened to be an incident where someone came in and started using derogatory language and even stated that they won't be in a place where they have, for not the right word that I always hate, using our word, working here, because they don't feel they deserve to be in that. Instantly, the manager spoke up and told them they were no longer welcome to be in the area. That is a thing that needs to happen more. I find when we have these labels and negative things are being shouted upon them, a lot of times we know what's wrong, but we don't tend to speak up and try to change it. Another example within the employment world for him is 2 very different interviews, which the first one, he went in and all the person that was interviewing saw was just a disability. They only saw what he couldn't do. They didn't give a chance to see what it is that he could do. He asked him questions the same formulaic questions that we would always hear, not things that could be phrased better for someone to interpret and respond to. In the second place, they took a whole new approach. And I find a lot of employers are doing this now, where they're interacting with the person. They walked around the store and asked him, what kind of jobs do you think are done here? What kind of jobs do you think? They asked him about who he was. Right off the bat, the very first thing she said in the interview was, I don't care about your disability, that doesn't matter. That means nothing to me. We don't even have to talk about it. That allowed him in the end, when he did find or did receive that job, to feel open enough to tell his other coworkers that he does have a disability, because there was no fear behind that. That was Matt's story. Next would be Chantel's. So Chantel's story is more through the education system and what supports and labels have done to her. So she wasn't diagnosed until later in life. So a lot of times she was labeled as the weird kid, or the student, or the not focused, or doesn't enjoy school, or the mean one. And that's more so because she didn't understand the social interactions and weren't being broken down correctly to her the way she needed it. So those labels then stunted anything that she could do. It allowed her opportunities within the education system to have certain supports, but even then it got to a point within school where teachers, because it was an invisible disability, they didn't believe that it was a real thing. So from past experiences from those teachers, they didn't accept that was a real thing. They may not have known or been educated to the topic of what it. So she wasn't afforded any supports through the education system. There was one program that she was involved with, but the problem with that program was only allocated for people with disabilities, which also took her out of class. Granted, it did help her, but it stunted her socially because she wasn't involved with any of her students anymore, which then lagged her behind in help and in cues. As she went on further and further, more of the services that were there stopped listening to her and only would take the disability at face value. Whatever she was diagnosed with on the sheet, that's exactly how we're going to interact, nothing else. It wasn't until university where they switched it up, and I commend them for this, is they did a relationship approach focus. Got to know her, they pushed the label to the side, and they got to know her and built a support system around that, not just what they read on the piece of paper. Although I promised her I would say this, she and many others hate the term differently able immensely. Last story I'm going to leave you with is I don't know how many people in here have heard about adaptabilities or unified sport, but a lot of times the opportunities afforded to people to go into sport, whether you have a disability, and go into your local domestic club, it's very minimal. A lot of people are forced out of situations because they feel with the title disability, there's a safety risk in the employment world, that there's a liability area that, maybe something might happen. Well, something might happen with anybody. So in domestic leagues, a lot of people have been forced out and moved into Special Olympics, which is great because they found their own community. They're able to move forward and join and do a lot of different things that they may not have been able to do. But that has also, I found, been very isolating, because in terms, you have everybody with a disability in one place, and then you have everybody with the community on the other side. And neither one is interacting with each other anymore. And it's just pulling it apart. So then when you want to have something, you want to have people with disabilities more involved in the community doesn't fully know what to do anymore, because they've just put it on that one program that supports disabilities to do all the work. So now, with one major program that has changed here, is there's an adaptabilities program, which takes both atypical and typical, puts them together on teams, and competes. And as I said before, there's been several people I worked with that actually competed on, the cheer squad that represented all of Canada, and they just won second place, so congrats to them. But the big impact of that is it has exposed a lot of people that have never, ever, ever, or had negative views of what the word disability meant. And I actually had a chance to talk to other members of the team, and one of their experiences in the past with somebody labeled as disabled had been very negative. So in terms when they would hear that, they would just bring that forward, and that's what they always thought of, and it didn't matter what the situation was, whether that person was mild-mannered or excited or whatever. All they thought about was that past experience. So a lot of times when you put that label on, you have to think, oh, that past experience that they might have had will also weigh in on how they treat that situation moving forward. So yeah, that's my my little spiel story. So I hope from that people learn to, like, overall, just disability, whatever term, it doesn't matter, disability, introvert, extrovert, hard to deal with, impoverished, immigrant, everybody is an immigrant, honestly. Those words have power, and it can be positive for the people that are finding it and using it to discover a piece of themselves. As many of the guys I work with, they take their diagnosis and labels and disabilities to learn about themselves. But for the outside public, a lot of times that comes back at them with a negative view. So just realize those words have power, and reframing how we use it. See those labels as maybe more of a guideline, not specifically what that person is or who they are. That's just maybe a way we can communicate with them, or maybe a situation they are in. Doesn't mean something will be like that forever. And that's, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing. This is now open to questions, but to get us primed and ready. And I think, Justin, you started it. So you with your last kind of now what? So you've talked your now work, but words have power, and using words as a guideline. So I'm going to go over to you, Jennifer. Now what?
So now what? I think we need to give people, we need to celebrate those reciprocal relationships, okay? We need to be able to take supports and services, but we also need to be able to accept supports and services from others. The people that we work with, they have gifts and assets. They have things that they can give. However, there's never been an expectation for them to give their gift. So what I'd like to leave you on is, what is the power of being needed? We all need to be needed in society. And if you were never asked or never expected to give, what kind of life are you going to lead? It's going to be lonely. It's going to be isolating. So use the power of being needed and allow people to rise to those expectations.
Beautiful. All right, Templeton, you're wrapping this part up.
Okay. Listening. I leave you with listening. Listening is key as you continue to move forward, and listen to what people have to say, not try to define them as a label or trying to define them in a particular way, but listen to the passion and what they can bring to the table and how they can bring their lived experience and all of that amazing uniqueness. Thinking about that. So listening is really important.
Awesome. So this is now open to you all. Post your questions in the question and answer box, because the chat box is too busy and I want to be able to get to your questions. So we do have a question. And it's about going back to what you said, Jennifer, about the history and how, funding, it comes by almost like the worse labels you can get, the better the funding you can get, right? And so how do we balance this? Because we all want funding. But, can you, and I'm going to, the question is, how can we create changes within those structures and practices, so that, applying for funding so that we can keep going is that are slower to change. So any thoughts?
Oh, that's a good question. And I don't necessarily have an easy answer. I think the first thing that I can think of is if our systems don't work, give ourselves permission to stop those systems and then rebuild, right? And then that's where we can get our funding from. I know in our particular sector in Ontario, so the developmental sector, we're going through a 10-year transformation called the Journey to Belonging, which is going to be focusing on more individualized funding, funding going specifically to individuals so that they can choose how and when they want support. But that's a big question. Advocacy with your communities for full inclusion, trying not to overprice things so that things are actually accessible, and being a strong advocate, right? Being that voice. And if it doesn't work the first time, go back over and over and over again. That is why we now have our Journey to Belonging. It was a number of families who did not stop at one no. Instead, they continued to go, we need different supports. You need to be responsive to what we need. And over a long period of time, the government's now responsive to that. So strong advocacy, but correct advocacy. Don't be mean, right? Because when you mean, nobody wants to listen to you. Be a good advocate. Use your voice in your power for the good, right? And bring us along, because we are also resources. We can help potentially.
All right, Justin Templeton, do you have anything to add? No,
That was good. That was good.
I think Jennifer said it all. Jennifer. Yeah.
I actually always have something to add and always something to say, coming from not in the service industry, but as soon as I saw this question, I thought, okay, how do we flip it upside down or flip it sideways, right? Because, right, what the question is saying and what you said, Jennifer, was that really the power is in the funding, and the funding creates this labeling in a deficit way. Do we get rid of it because we all want funding and we don't want that to dwindle and dry up? Is there, and I'm posing this to you all, is there a way of, yes, we need to fit a square peg into a square hole for funding? Does that have to define what we do with the people that we are working with? So that's kind of like, can there, and that's why I said flip it, so that yes, we got the funding. Maybe it's a Venn diagram where you have the funding here, but you have the work that we do in an asset way. In the middle is the person getting funding, but also being an asset. Does that make sense? Is that something that can happen?
It's something that we're trying to make happen right now. Due to COVID, our day programs closed down and we chose not to reopen them. And instead, we are now taking an asset-based community approach to supporting that same group of people, not under my roof, but under the roofs of my community, right? So we are already rethinking how we are using our funding and how we can support people in a different way so that they are supported more close to home. Again, getting away from special places for special people. We're all special, so we all belong everywhere.
Templeton, do you have any?
I love that Jennifer said that making sure that bringing people together in the community, taking the funding close to community. And I think that that's really important, and taking on that concept of special. And I think looking at policies is really important. I think that I always try to say policy, the way you set a policy is the way how you allow certain directions to go as you continue to move forward. And so reviewing how the guidelines are set when making funding agreements upon different areas, and knowing that, looking at the language of when you're targeting a certain demographic, don't view them as a certain label, but try to be inclusive of welcoming everyone. So yeah.
Yeah, and it is like this, if you look at, it's taken a long time for us to get to today, right? And the system. And so we're not going to change the system overnight. And it is going to be it's going to just, what did I hear? However long it took us to get here, you know, it's going to take us twice as long to get out, because we have to undo and then rethink and do. And so I think there are little things that we can do. And Jennifer at KW Habilitation are actually thinking outside the box and are trying to rethink the programming. And, you know, the funding is still coming in, but it's what you do with the funds. It doesn't always have to be a deficit based. Maybe try something a little bit new. And one of the things I thought about as you were talking and thinking is that no label, like no label without an asset. So if you're labeling somebody some whatever label, you have to have some assets to go with it, right? So it's not just a label and that's all it's on the paper. Might be a way to do this, right? And it's going to take some time to shift mindsets. So another question here is, do you have any advice on moving away from labels while also, this is the same one, also holding governments and service providers accountable to making sure certain demographics are not left behind? These are big questions.
I think about that a little bit, and just I think it's really important when you say you want to include everyone, especially when you have a different demographic. Don't actually, how do I say this by being nice without trying to come across? Okay, what I'm saying is that when you are, let's say, for example, someone's applying, trying to be a part of a different cohort, and you're weeding out certain people, I would say try to give people a chance if they have, I don't know how to say this, but giving people an opportunity without labeling them based on their experiences, if I can say that. When people are applying for different funding opportunities, I don't know how to say this, but when people apply for different funding opportunities, sometimes they're not moving forward because of they know them based on experiences, or they are aware of them based on someone else said something about them. Stop labeling people into that way, and try to connect with them for your own story, and try to learn for yourself. And I think that's one of the areas of connecting, because a lot of people are getting funding because of who they know, and not trying to connect with people because of what they can get from the other person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this goes down to the word bravery. To affect any kind of change, it starts with one person, and that's the bravest person on earth at that time. So when Heather was wrapping up the last question, bravery jumped into my mind. When this question came up, bravery comes to my mind, because we need individuals with lived experience, we need family members with lived experience, and we need service providers with lived experience to have the bravery to remove those labels, to say that this is not good enough. Instead, let's look at things differently. Because if we can be brave enough individually, then society will hopefully join us in our bravery. And then once that happens, then that governmental shift can happen. Maybe we don't need those labels, or maybe those labels are tweaked a little bit so that they're actually relevant to today, right? Because even some of the labels that we are still using today are not relevant. So be brave, be that first one to step up and say, you know what? I see beyond this. I see all of this. Now let me share all of this out there, and let me help you share all of that out there. And if that means going to service providers and advocating, then do that. If it means going to governments and advocating, do that. It's our job to listen and to affect change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's one step at a time. Start, and the ripple effect will happen. There's a last question, and I have to admit, I had to Google what intersectional identities are. And so the question is, what might be the relationship or connection with intersectional identities and labels? And so intersectional identities, the concept that an individual's identity consists of multiple intersecting factors, including but not limited to gender identity, gender expression, race, ethnic, class, religious, etc. Any thoughts on that?
Well, for me personally, Heather, that one's a doozy, because as soon as you fall under more than one label, there's now who owns that person, who actually is responsible for supporting that person. And I'll use people in my field, and this is going back, okay, I've been in the field a while. So way back when the dual diagnosis came out, that's somebody with an intellectual or developmental disability plus a mental health, concern. And for many, many years, it was, okay, who actually is responsible for supporting this group? Is it community, children, and social services, or is it the Ministry of Health? And because of that, so many did that gap. So that intersectional stuff, again, all of these things are just part of who you are. They're your makeup. We all have multiple things that make us who we are. So let's introduce a new label, human, done. But like, honestly, if there's so many, nobody will help, because they're saying, oh, they'll go over there, or somebody over here will be better, right? And it's just who we are, pieces of who we are.
There's a saying that says, label jars, not people. Put labels on the jars, on products and items, and that's where you leave the labels, not on people, but they have what it takes.
Yeah, there's some great comments in the chat, and I'm so sorry trying to navigate the question in the chat and moderating. I'm gonna really go back there and reflect, and there's some great reflections there. And so really, like, this webinar was not meant to solve any problems. This webinar was really just an idea, a thought that we wanted to put out there. And, a movement starts with, as Jen said, one person, right? And trying one idea. And then someone else will try, and someone else will try. And so this is a conversation that we're going to be continuing. Justin and Templeton are going to be taking this topic and workshopping it at our event in St. Albert, Alberta on June 6th to 8th. So this is just a drop in the bucket, and we're going to be trying to see what we can do and continuing the conversation. And honestly, you all on the call are the experts. And so please, join us in this idea and thought. Could you imagine a world with no labels and how awesome that would be? I know there's some things when you go one way, some things but let's think positive, and let's think great change. And then the US General just announced that loneliness and disconnection is a new health issue. We have to think about labeling, and what does labeling and how does labeling fit into this, and creating that sense of belonging. And so I think the time is now, right? The time is now to take this idea of world with no labels and see what we can do. So we are recording this. All the tools and resources will be done in a post email to you. I want to thank Jennifer, Templeton, Justin, for your inspiration and being that brave person to come on here and say, let's do a world with no labels. And thanks, Jamie, for helping behind the scenes. And thank you all for joining us in this conversation. And please, please, please continue it. Wherever you are, continue it. Be that brave person to try to see what we can do to create change, especially if government, right? If we want to change systems, that's going to take us all. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.